What's good, everyone? Evan Jarvis here, and today we are going to be doing another tier list video for Heroes of Hold'em. In today's tier list video, we are going to be ranking all the equipment in Heroes of Hold'em from S tier down to D tier. And the cool thing about the equipment is it can be used by all the classes. So by watching this video ranking the equipment in Heroes of Hold'em, you'll be able to better equip any character, any hero that you're playing, regardless of the race, regardless of the class. So just for some context, this tier list will be focused specifically on helping you do better in reg-filled tournaments where you're playing against other regulars, other heroes who have a lot of abilities and spells they can use. It's not going to be so much suited towards the 1 human 9 NPC or 2 human 4 NPC games that you might be competing in. However, when we're looking at specific builds, like maybe minion builds that do perform well in that environment, I will speak specifically to those as well. When it comes to my expertise in Heroes of Hold'em, I finished in the top 10 on the season leaderboard before, despite playing much lower volume than the other players who finished above me. I've gotten multiple final tables in the Zombie Horde, which is the biggest field tournament in the game, including a couple of second place finishes. And I've also got plenty of first place finishes when battling against the toughest players in the game. The guys ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've had my fair share of first place finishes against them as well. So you're getting a lot of insight from someone who has played the game firsthand. I also consulted with the developers of the game for their opinions on the most powerful pieces of equipment because they have access to a lot of data as to what performs well, what people are using. So you can know that this is coming from really good firsthand experience as well as being very well researched. Finally, I have played extensively with all 7 classes in Heroes of Hold'em, and I've made very different builds for the different classes as well, depending on specifically what I wanted to do with that hero. So you're gonna get a whole lot of variety in this tier list video that I put together for you, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. I hope that watching this video is going to help you build better heroes, get more caches, and ultimately get more wins, and most importantly, enable you to play the style of game that you want to play at the highest level possible, because there are specific combinations of equipment that really favor different types of builds, and that's one of the things that makes Heroes of Hold'em so fun. So just before I get into actually ranking each piece of equipment from S tier to D tier, I want to quickly introduce the different categories of equipment so that if you're newer to the game, you don't really understand how all the equipment works, you can get a better grasp of, what these 65 pieces of equipment do and why you would put them together in different ways. So I'm going to pop up a little spreadsheet that I put together, which has the categories and all the pieces of equipment that fit into each category. If you just want this information, you don't want the whole walkthrough, you can grab a screenshot of this and you're good to go. But you're going to get a lot more value if you stick around for the full breakdown. So the different categories that we have when it comes to equipment in Heroes of Hold'em are survival-based equipment, which give you more health when you find yourself running low or potentially on empty. We have the equipment that helps you regain abilities, regain spells, which is an extremely powerful thing in this game. We have equipment that gives you extra health before the game. We have equipment that gives you extra health in game, but doesn't necessarily activate if you have 0 health. So it can't save you from elimination like the survival equipment can, but it can help you gain more health and just kind of coast through the tournament. We have equipment that gives you extra buffs. We have equipment that gives you extra pot. So if you win a pot for 1,000 chips, maybe the equipment gives you an extra 200 chips or an extra 400 chips or an extra 1,000 chips. We have equipment that deals direct damage. We have equipment that gives you free chips or helps you with position. So free chips or lets you keep the button for an extra hand. So I kind of figured it goes in the same category. We have equipment that gives you free information, which can be very fun to use. Seeing board cards before they're revealed, seeing your opponent's cards. We have equipment that gives you debuffs, that applies debuffs to your opponents, kind of puts a penalty, a handicap on them. We have equipment that lessens the effect of debuffs on you. We have equipment that prevents damage or prevents debuffs altogether. We have equipment that boosts the strength or leech of your minions. We have equipment that gives healing to the minions in-game. We have equipment that removes debuffs. And then finally, we have equipment that limits betting. So here's kind of the short list of it all here. I guess it's the long list, it's the full list. And now we're actually going to go through each piece of equipment, image by image, give a description of each and what it does, and then I'm going to rank them from S tier to D tier so that you have as thorough of an understanding as you possibly can when it comes to the equipment in Heroes of Hold'em. Let's go ahead and get into it. So the first piece of equipment we have is the Ankh necklace. 20% chance to collect 12% of any pot you go to the flop in. So this is going to be a B tier piece of equipment for me. So this is one of those pieces of equipment that's going to give you healing in game and enable you to get extra chips in the game. One thing that's really cool about the Ankh necklace is if it activates, those chips are given to you at the end of the hand, so it can also save you from elimination. Most of the things that can give you healing and save you from elimination are going to be B tier pieces of equipment for me, and Ankh necklace is one that I definitely like putting in that category. If you're doing a build that's purely based around survival and getting as many free chips as you can and as many extra chances to stay in the game as you can, Ankh necklace is going to be one piece of equipment that you'll definitely want to include on that build. Next, we have Antidote Potion, bolstered. When you possess the button, 10% chance to remove all debuffs on you and all minions you control. So first, I want to talk about what bolstered means. It means that depending how many players are on the table, the percentage is going to be different. So the description here says a 10% chance to remove all debuffs. That is per person at the table. So if you're playing heads up, it's going to be a 20% chance. If you're playing three-handed, it's going to be a 30% chance. Four-handed, five-handed, 40, 50% chance of it working. I think at the peak it's 50%. So it may actually be 10% chance per opponent that's on the table. Anyway, you'll see that in game, but Antidote Potion is going to be a B tier piece of equipment for me. If you're playing in a lineup with strong players who have all the abilities, you're probably going to be getting some debuffs cast on you. Having a piece of equipment that helps you get rid of those debuffs is very beneficial. The downsides to it though are it only activates when you're on the button, and you're going to have at most a 50% chance, which is pretty good, but it's not 100, 50% chance of removing those debuffs. On the other hand, if you're using your abilities that enable you to remove debuffs, A, you can use them whenever you want, and B, they work 100% of the time. So for those reasons, despite Antidote Potion being extremely useful in tough lineups, it's going to be a B tier piece of equipment for me rather than A tier. Next, we have Base Defense. Bolstered, 7% chance when you are in the big blind, no one can raise pre-flop. And for me, this one's just going to go straight to D tier. Yes, it is occasionally helpful to prevent your opponents from raising your blind and being limited to only calling and limping in, but there just isn't a huge benefit to it, and there are way stronger pieces of equipment. Plus, it doesn't activate every hand, so it's going to be D tier for me. I just don't see a whole lot of utility in this piece of equipment. Next, we have Blackjack. Winning at Showdown with Ace 10, Ace Jack, Ace Queen, or Ace King, Blackjack, gives you a 60% chance to reactivate a previously used ability. This one's going to go straight to S tier for me. Regaining abilities is one of the most powerful things you can do in Heroes of Hold'em because the abilities in and of themselves are just so powerful and can change the game so much. Having the opportunity to get one of them back, total game changer. Now, with Blackjack, you do need to be dealt a Blackjack hand for it to have the chance to activate. You then need to win the hand for it to have a chance to activate, and then still it's only a 60% chance to activate. But because the reward is so great, and because with hands like Ace Queen and Ace King, you're almost always going to be all in anyway, and most of the time Ace Jack and Ace 10 on shallow stacks are good enough to go with anyway, you're getting a bonus on hands that you'd probably play anyway, and the reward of that bonus is so significant that Blackjack is just going to be S tier. When I'm working on a build where I want to be regaining abilities, Blackjack is always going to be there, along with another piece of equipment that we will get to later on in this tier list video. Okay, next we have Blindfold. 13% of hands, your whole cards are face down, win an extra 100% of the pot in health. This one is also going to go straight to D tier for me. Obviously, the reward of winning double the pot is really nice, but the penalty of having to play blind just isn't something I want to have in my game. I want my equipment to make me better off. I don't want it to make me worse off. And if it's giving me a penalty, why would I want to have that? Also, it's only hitting 13% of the time, which isn't all that frequent. And the reward's nice, but if I'm going to try to win a huge pot, I probably want to know what I have. So high risk, decent reward piece of equipment, one that I pretty much never use. Another one that I pretty much never use is Broadsword. Eliminating a minion at showdown gives you a 50% chance to spawn an imp with 40% average chip stack, which takes that seat. This is going to be D tier for me. I have seen some of the NPCs use it, somewhat effectively. If you slay a minion late game and you spawn an imp there with 40% average health, it could be a decent sized stack. But first, it requires a minion to still be in play. Yeah, I have to slay it, and then it's a 50-50 that you get an imp that, it's just a whatever minion. So D tier for me, not something I ever equip. Next, we have Buckler. 15% chance for a free straddle. And this used to be a 25% chance for a free straddle, which was pretty OP. Even at 15%, I'm still going to throw this in the S tier category. There's nothing better than getting free chips other than getting your abilities back. So the most powerful thing in Heroes of Hold'em, getting abilities back. The next most beneficial thing in Heroes of Hold'em, getting free chips. Then the other one, healing and recovering. Those are all kind of your big three that you want to focus on. So even at a 15% boost to free straddle, Buckler is just going to be S tier for me. A straddle is 2 times the big blind. It happens when you're under the gun, and it scales as the blinds go up. So yeah, at 50, 100 blinds, yeah, the free straddle is only worth 200. But at 50K, 100K, it's worth 200K. At 5 million, 10 million, it's worth 20 million. So this can be for a crazy amount of free chips that can help you get off the short stack. And if you combine it with the character that already has, 10%, 15% free straddle, you can get to a very high frequency of getting free straddles, and you'll be blown away at how many free chips you can get by using the Buckler. So even at 15%, reduced from 25%, still S tier in my books. Next, we have Caltrops. Opponents beating you in a showdown gain the bleeding debuff for a cycle, which is 6 hands. Deactivated with 2 players left, doesn't stack, which means while someone has the debuff on them, they can't get hit with the debuff again. You can only have 1 active at a time, but as soon as the first one wears off, you could hit them with it again. Anyway, this is going to go in D tier for me. I'm not a huge fan of the bleeding debuff. It's 3% damage per hand. So you're looking at about 15, 18% when this activates. And yeah, we're going to see that other pieces of equipment can apply stronger debuffs than bleeding. So this one's just going to be D tier. Next, we have Collection Plate. 12% chance all players pay an additional ante directly to you pre-flop. And for me, this one's going to go into the C tier. I know I mentioned that free chips is one of the most beneficial things you can get in Heroes of Hold'em, but there are a couple of things about Collection Plate. First off, the antes are not a crazy amount. They usually equate to about a small blind, and the more shorthanded you're playing, the smaller those antes are going to be. So the reward is going to get smaller and smaller as you're playing more and more shorthanded. The other thing about Collection Plate is when it triggers, you get the antes immediately. So unlike Ankh Necklace, which gives its healing reward at the end of the hand and can give you a little bit of an extra life, granted a small one, but a little bit of an extra life if you get stacked, Collection Plate doesn't work in that way. In that it will give you extra chips, but it gives you the extra chips immediately when it activates. So it can't save you from being all in. Yeah, because even if you went all in pre-flop, yeah, no, you would have already got it. So it does not have kind of that all-in protection effect that Ankh Necklace has, which makes it a lesser ability. But still being able to get free chips, a free small blind, is definitely enough to get it in the C tier category as opposed to the D tier category. 12% chance, reasonable frequency, about 1 out of 8. And if you combine it with something else we're going to get to later, which also has a 12% chance of a similar effect, now you're picking up a free ante 1 in every 4 hands, which can add up. Free small blind every 2/3 of an orbit. You're going to get quite a few chips when you add it all up. Anyway, next piece of equipment is Crystal Ball. 7% chance to reveal all hold cards of opponents, only visible to you. So this is going to be one of those free information pieces of equipment. And initially, this is one that I was using a lot because I'm a poker player. So the more information I can have, the better. Then I went through a period of not using it so much because I was focused more on kind of the fantasy and magic abilities that were available, all the buffs. But I recently started using it again, and I realized that even though it only hits 7% of the time, this is an S tier piece of equipment. The activation, not super frequent, 7% of the time, probably once every 2 orbits or so. But when it goes off, you literally see all of your opponent's cards, and they don't know that you can see their cards. You get to play them like an absolute fiddle. You can know when to value bet and exactly how much to value bet. You can know when your bluffs are going to get through. You can know pretty predictably how they're going to play, and it can combine well with other abilities and other pieces of equipment as well. So even though it doesn't go off that often, only at 7%, I believe that the effect is probably the best effect you can get in the game. You literally have all the information about your opponent's cards and they don't even know that you know that. S tier, and I stand behind that firmly. Next we have Cursed Pentagram. Opponents beating you at Showdown gain the Hex debuff for 3 hands. Deactivated heads up, doesn't stack. So this is another debuff piece of equipment, and it's a pretty good one. I throw this one in the A tier because in my books, the best debuff in the game is Hex, followed by Poison. So it gives you the best debuff for 3 hands. You get to take 3% of your opponent's health, and it goes right to you, so it's direct leech. And the great thing about Hex Pentagram is you can combine it with some other pieces of equipment that lengthen the effect of a debuff. So instead of it being 3 hands of Hex, it might be 7 hands of Hex, or 11 hands of Hex, or even more hands of Hex. So because Hex is probably the best debuff in the game, coupled with the fact that you can combine this with other equipment to lengthen the effect of the debuff, Cursed Pentagram, A tier, and very close to S tier, honestly. Next we have Dagger, 10% Pickpocket. And this is one of those ones that can get you free chips, and it actually can also go in the survival category, but I'm still gonna throw it in D tier. It only happens 10% of the time. And when that 10% pickpocket happens, I think you steal about 10% of the pot. Maybe it's a range of 5 to 20% of the pot. Either way, it's okay if it's a large pot. It's not a ton if it's a small pot, but the fact that it only goes off 10% of the time, I'm not a huge fan. I think if you have it on a hero that already has 10% or 15% pickpocket where you can bring it up to 25, now it's starting to get a little interesting. But of the kind of survival abilities, free chip equipments, this would be the lowest ranked one, and I throw it in the D tier. Maybe you could argue it could sneak into C, but just barely if so. Next we have Demonic Gauntlet. Hex everyone for 1 hand, but nothing can extend or increase the damage. This does not stack. This is a B tier piece of equipment for me because it has the Hex debuff. It is only 1 hand and you can't extend it, which is not the greatest, but Hex still is pretty awesome. And it hexes not just the person who beat you in a showdown, it hexes everyone in the hand. So anytime 2 spades hit the flop, everyone gets hexed, and you're just going to be leashing about 15%, which is pretty good. All right, next we have Dragon Skull. When all in, breathe fire, causing the burning debuff to anyone who folds until they win a hand. Deactivated when heads up, does not stack. This one is going to be D tier in my books. I have seen a lot of players when they were playing Wizard and when, Fire Wizards was kind of the meta, that they would add Dragon Skull just to add even more burning to the effects they already had. But the fact that burning is not the craziest debuff, I think it hits you for 5% for a hand, and that you can get out of it by winning a pot, means that, yeah, people will take the debuff for 1 hand and then they'll quickly find their way out of it. So it's not really going to last. It's not going to have too much sticking power. But another dragon related thing that does have a little bit more sticking power is Dragon Tooth Talisman. Knocking out a human gives you a 60% chance to reactivate a random ability. So it has the same benefit as Blackjack, and it has the same percentage chance as Blackjack of hitting. The difference is the trigger is not winning a showdown with Ace 10 through Ace King. It's actually knocking out a human. So the reward is really nice for Dragon Tooth Talisman, but the chance to hit it is tough because eliminating human players is the toughest thing in the game pretty much. So for that reason, it's going to be a B tier piece of equipment for me. I really do like the reward, but I dislike how difficult it is to actually pull it off and get that activation. And so that's why it's going to be in the B tier. All right, next we have Energy Shield. 50% chance to absorb any direct damage or debuffs that come from equipment. So this is going to be one of those defensive prevent damage categories, and that's going to go in the B tier for me. It is very helpful to have something that can absorb direct damage. There are some spells that will hit you for 10, 20, 30% of your health, but there are rarely spells that hit you for 100%. I think the one thing it might protect you against is like Longbow. But even still, it's only activating 50% of the time, And most people are not making builds that are focused on the immediate damage spells. So I don't see this being needed all that often, unless the meta becomes everyone's using direct damage spells, at which point, you know, Energy Shield would make it up to A tier. But because it's not usually needed, except in rare circumstances, it's just going to be a B tier piece of equipment for me. All right, next we have Eye of Foresight. 30% chance to see the first card of the flop pre-flop, so it's going to be one of those information pieces of equipment. And I don't personally use Eye of Foresight, but it is one of the developers' favorite pieces of equipment, and he says it's just helped him win so many chips. So I can't argue with the creator of the game, who designed all these pieces of equipment and try to make them as balanced as possible, but knows some that are better than others. And if it's something that he equips on the majority of his heroes, I have to accept that that's going to make it an S tier piece of equipment. So when I've used it, it's very fun. You know, you can know if a pair's coming. You can call all-ins more liberally when you know you're going to connect with the board, and other people don't know that it's activated for you. So it is very helpful to have that extra piece of information, and a 30% chance to see the flop or the first card of the flop is a pretty decent frequency. You know, 2 hands per orbit, you're going to know the first card of the flop, and that will help you with your strategy. So we'll throw it in the S tier. I obviously like Crystal Ball much better, but Crystal Ball only hits 7% of the time, whereas Eye of Foresight is hitting 30% of the time. All right, next we have Family Heirlooms. If an ability from an opponent caused you to discard whole cards this turn, you have the choice to keep the new cards or discard and return the old cards. This is a pretty interesting piece of equipment. It's a pretty good defensive piece of equipment. I think it's C tier because you only really need this against the Wizard and the Warrior. Those are the classes that, and the Necro actually, and the Necro. Those are the classes that can force you to discard your cards. But usually when I see people playing Necro, they aren't necessarily using Time of Uncertainty. And I see a lot of Druids in the mix, and I see a lot of Clerics in the mix, and I see a lot of heroes that are not using the card changing abilities. That being said, if you think you're going to be in a lineup with a bunch of Wizards and a bunch of Necromancers who are using Time of Uncertainty, in that case, it's going to rank higher. I could easily see it being, you know, Family Heirlooms becomes the B tier and Energy Shield becomes the C tier. In fact, based on the builds that I see, actually, I am going to make that swap. The effectiveness of these abilities really depends on who you're playing against. And actually, the cool thing about Family Heirlooms is that if they change your cards and you get better cards, you can just keep them. But you have the option to go back to the previous hand you had. So I wouldn't love tying up one of my equipment slots with Family Heirlooms, but in the right lineup, when you're playing with Wizards and Necromancers and Warriors and those players who are going to try to break up your good hands and turn them into worse hands, well, having this extremely good piece of defense that's going to activate 100% of the time they try to change your whole cards is actually pretty beneficial, especially since some of those heroes are going to be using abilities that give them back those abilities which can change your cards. So this can actually get used quite a few times in a match of Heroes of Hold'em, whereas Energy Shield is not going to be triggered anywhere near as often. So actually, on retrospect, talking through it, I like the swap here. Family Heirlooms, B tier. Okay, next we have Fishing Pole. 20% chance per hand to heal minions you control for 12% of average health pools. I'm going to throw this one in the D tier, despite the fact that on my minion-based builds, I'm a big fan of the Fishing Pole. Minion-based builds typically don't perform as well in the tough lineups when you're playing against a lot of heroes because minions are fairly easy to play against. Minion-based builds tend to do really well in the 2-man tournaments where if you have a lot of minions, they are going to make up a large percent of the player pool. You know, if there are 24 players in the tournament and 5 of them or 6 of them are your minions, you represent a quarter of the player pool. And what can happen in those spots is your minions end up with tables with each other, and they're just battling with each other, giving you free leech every hand. And if you have buffs on them, you're getting the benefit of that. And if you're playing that kind of game, you're often going to find on the final 2 tables, you still have some minions left, or on the final table, you will have multiple minions there. So being able to heal them for 12% of average health pool is pretty nice because as the game gets deeper in, as the blinds go up and players get eliminated and the average stack is higher, the benefit of this healing buff goes up as well and becomes higher and higher. So late game, this can actually be really powerful when it goes off because your minions can be healing for huge amounts of health, way more than the starting stack. But because it is specific to minion-based builds only, I have to put it in the D tier category, despite the fact that on many of my minion builds, I'm using Fishing Pole. All right, speaking of minions, next we have Gorgon Leash. If you have 5 or less minions at the start of event, create a Gorgon under your control as well. This is going to go in the C tier for me. It's a free 3-point minion. Gorgons have 90% starting health and I think 15% leech. They're pretty solid. They're pretty good. You know, they're not a dragon by any means, but they're also not an imp or a succubus. This is a mid-tier minion. You can get it for free if you're doing a minion-based build. Adding a Gorgon Leash often going to be helpful. Or if you're just a character that could use an extra minion and doesn't have one, Gorgon Leash is a great way to basically get 3 minion points. I'm a fan. But since it's for minion-based builds, that's why it's, you know, not going to make it into the B or A tier. Next, we have Great Axe, which is a legendary item. 20% extra health earned in a showdown win versus minions, 10% versus players. And this one's going to be an A tier one for me. This is one of those extra health generating pieces of equipment, which can really be a game changer in Heroes of Hold'em. Let's say you win a 100k pot against a hero and you have Great Axe, you get an extra 10k on top of it. Early game, you win a 10k pot against a minion, you get an extra 2k health on top of it. These are free chips being dropped to you out of the ether, just created from the ether and added to your health, dropped onto your chip stack. And there's a reason it's a legendary item, because gaining extra chips is extremely powerful. And in the late game, this scales. As the pots get bigger, the extra benefit you get becomes bigger. So this is one of those pieces of equipment that works both in the early game and the mid game, and the late game is kind of universally beneficial. And that's one of the reasons as well that it's making it into the A tier ranking for my equipment. All right, next we have Great Hammer. Deal 20% of pots won in showdown in health damage to minions, losing showdown 10% versus players. So this is similar to the Great Axe in that it's 20% versus minion and 10% versus heroes, but it's doing damage as opposed to gaining health. And for me, Great Axe is going to be B tier. I like the benefit of doing some extra damage, you know, kind of instead of gaining chips out of the ether, you're just taking chips and throwing them into the void. But unless you're getting the knockout with this, it doesn't feel like it makes a huge difference. The nice thing is if you win an all-in pot against someone and they use a healing potion or a smoke bomb or something to get some health back, the extra 20% damage, well, 20% you're doing against a minion could knock them out. 10% if they're using a smoke bomb can potentially knock them out. So this can be kind of your fatality blow against the right player, against the right time. And in that case, it's very beneficial. But because that's, you know, kind of a once a game event that's going to come up, a once a game situation that's going to come up, I can't rank it higher than this. Very similar to Great Axe, but Great Axe definitely better gaining the extra health as opposed to doing the damage. I do see Great Hammer being a lot of fun because when you get those fatalities that people didn't see coming, it's a pretty satisfying feeling. All right, next we have a Healing Potion. One-time use. When ending a hand under 25% of starting health pool, recover 25% of average health pool. Easy S tier. This is one of those survival-based pieces of equipment. Pretty much a must-have for any hero that you're playing. This gives you an extra life when you get stacked, and the deeper you are into the tournament, the bigger that extra life is going to be because it's based on the average stack, which is going to go up as there are more chips in play and going to go up as there are fewer players remaining. So you want to use your healing potion as late into the game as possible, but it's a must-have. It's just absolutely S tier. One thing to note is that it automatically activates when ending a hand under 25% of starting health pool. So if starting health pool is like 3,000, if you get to 750, it's going to activate. That's not going to happen very often, but it's something to pay attention to early on in the game. If you're kind of chipping down, you're kind of bleeding out a little bit, you want to be wary to avoid letting yourself get to that 25% of starting health stack, because if this goes off and it wasn't in an all-in situation, it sometimes kind of feels like a waste. And also the average health pool at the start is not going to be that significant. So you want to avoid it triggering in the early game, and you want to try to play in such a way that if it is triggering in the early game, it's because you were all in, so you get kind of the full benefit. And ideally, you don't trigger it early so you can use it in the late game, because that's when it's going to be the most beneficial. But something to pay attention to. Keep an eye on your health. Remember what your starting health was, because you don't want this to just go off early on and you've kind of wasted one of your best pieces of equipment. All right, next we have Jeweler's Loop. Steal 8% of the pot if there is at least 2 diamonds on the flop. So this is going to be one of those extra health but also survival based pieces of equipment. And for this one, I'm going to throw it in the B tier. When I hadn't used it that much, I thought it was a C tier ability, but what I realized about Jeweler's Loop is it's really great. It's really great. I believe that it activates at the end of the hand. Like, it may activate when you hit the flop, but I feel like it actually activates at the end of the hand, in which case it gives you that extra life. And even if it doesn't, if I am mistaken on that, it activates right away. Still, getting 8% of the pot is pretty significant. And the great thing about Jeweler's Loop is you can get this 8% even if you're not in the hand. You can have folded pre-flop, but if 2 diamonds come on the flop, you're getting 8% of that pot. So this is a really great way to get free chips. And if you're doing a free chips based build, it's another one you're going to want to combine with Ankh to get free chips without playing pots. I've seen this do very well. And in the zombie horde in particular, this is a really useful piece of equipment, which will also combine well with another one that's coming up later called Prayer Beads. Okay, next we have Kite Shield Bolstered. 11% chance for a free small blind. So if you're playing at a full table, it's a 55% chance at a free small blind, and it goes down from there. This one's going to be B tier for me. It is a free chips piece of equipment, and 55% chance is pretty good. Half the time that the blinds are coming around, you don't have to pay a small blind. It also scales as the game goes on. As the blinds get bigger, your percentage chance of getting that free small blind stays the same at 55% or 44 if you're playing 5-handed, and so on and so forth as you get more short-handed. And it can just really save you. It can really carry you. This is another one that in the zombie horde where the blinds get insanely big, or in the flip for your life events where the blinds are extremely big and stacks are very shallow, getting those free small blinds can really enable you to cruise a lot more easily than not getting them will. And it's something that combines well with Tower Shield, which is going to be coming up later if you're looking for I don't have to pay the blind kind of build, which is similar to the I'm going to heal for a lot of chips without having to get involved pots kind of build, but a different way of approaching it. All right, next we have Lockpicks. 12% chance to steal all antes pre-flop. This is extremely similar to Collection Plate, and so it's going to go to the same rank as Collection Plate. It is a C tier piece of equipment. So Collection Plate is slightly better because it requires your opponents to put more money in the pot. But again, it's not a crazy amount. Lockpicks, you're stealing about a small blind. You're getting about a free small blind, similar to the Kite Shield we were just looking at. The difference is Kite Shield was hitting 55% of the time when you're in the small blind. Lockpicks is hitting 12% of the time total. So if you combine Lockpicks with Collection Plate, that means about 24% of the time you're going to be getting all the antes. You're going to be getting a free small blind. And, you know, when working in tandem, it's a pretty solid combination. But on their own, nothing crazy. And I do think there are better healing abilities than these. The other thing about Lockpicks is, same as Collection Plate, you get the chips right away, so they don't offer you that all-in protection that things like, you know, Healing Potion and Ankh Necklace do. All right, we're gonna pivot here from healing to damage. We have Longbow Bolstered. 4% chance when possessing the button to deal 10% of your health pool in damage to all opponents. So at a full table, we're looking at 20% of the time, and as it gets shorter and shorter handed, we're working down to, I think, probably 4% at the lowest. This is a B tier piece of equipment for me. It's nice to be able to do damage. This is one of the pieces of equipment that can actually knock players out of the game. And I guess if you combine that with Dragon Tooth Talisman, that's getting kind of interesting. You can take out some players, maybe get some abilities back. And it works best if you're using a character that can build up a big stack, especially early game, mid game. If you have a lot of chips, if you have a big health pool, you're going to be doing more damage because it's not 10% of average health pool damage, 10% of your health pool. So if you have everyone way out chipped, maybe 10% of your stack covers them. and you can actually eliminate multiple players with longbow. It's really funny when an event ends with players getting taken out by the longbow. And if combined with a button-based equipment build, which I will highlight the other pieces of equipment that fit into that build, you can actually do a lot of damage with longbow. This can be combined with warrior abilities like Might Makes Right, where you retain the button for 3 hands, or the Thieves' This Thing's Stuck, which lets you keep the button for 6 hands. And at that point, you know, you've got a very high chance that it's going to go off at least once, if not multiple times. So when combining with a button-based build, it could probably go up to A tier, but on its own, in general, I'm going to leave it in the B tier. All right, next we have Lucky Dice. Winning with 7 deuce hole cards gives 250% of the pot in health before showdown, or 1000% of the pot after showdown. That's 10x the pot if you win with 7 deuce at the showdown. This one's really fun to play, but for it to happen, you both have to get 7 deuce and you have to win with it. So I'm going to throw it in C tier. For many heroes, it is tough to win a pot with 7 deuce. Unless you have some ability that forces your opinion to fold, like the Thief's Threaten. If you have the Thief's ability of Threaten, where you can force your opponents to fold and guarantee that you win the pot, now Lucky Dice is pretty interesting. You could go all in, force your opponent to fold if you don't have them beat, and get 250% of the pot, which is your chips, times 2.5. You'd be tripling up your stack and then some. If you go all in and you happen to win with a pair of 2s or a pair of 7s or a flush, because suited 7 deuce works too, well, no need to cast Threaten. Just take that pot and take 10x on top of it. So it doesn't hit super often. You have to get 7 deuce, and you have to either have a hero that can kind of guarantee winning a pot, or you have to run well and win a showdown or bluff your opponent out. But when it does hit, it can hit for crazy amounts, and it is super fun. If you've watched my Heroes of Hold'em home game video, you saw Lucky Dice go off and me just being like, whoa, that's crazy. So it's something I enjoy. It's something I mix in on my Thief build because of the ability to cast that spell. But in and of its own, and for general across all the different heroes, I don't think it's the greatest thing, and that's why it's going to be in C tier. All right, next we have marked cards, another information-based piece of equipment. 60% chance pre-flop to see the flop if you have a pocket pair. And this one is going to go in B tier for me. The hard thing to do is get the pocket pair in the first place. But I've found that 60% chance feels like it's close to 100. It feels like this thing goes off almost all the time. It's really nice if you get dealt a premium pair like 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, kings to see if there's an ace on the flop. Because unlike Eye of Foresight, where you see the first card of the flop, marked cards, you see the whole board. If you have aces, well, it'll tell you what's coming. I once had marked cards and crystal ball go off when I had aces. So I knew exactly how to play my opponent to lure them in and get the max value. And then, of course, there's the other benefit that if you have a smaller pair like 8s through deuces, you know 60% of the time whether or not you're going to flop a set or not. So it makes it really easy for calling all ins, makes it really easy for determining if you want to limp it to a pot or if you want to make the pot massive when you have a small pair. And because it hits 60% of the time, it's borderline A tier. It's borderline A tier. The hard part's getting dealt those pocket pairs, and then it doesn't quite go off 100% of the time. It's 60% of the time. But it is a very, very, very good piece of equipment. And if you're doing an information-based build where you want to get as much info from your opponents, you're going to want to combine this with the Eye of Foresight and the other piece of equipment we're going to get to, which show you the turn and the river more frequently. And you can have a lot of fun getting a ton of information that your opponents don't have, and they don't know that you have it either. All right, next we have Midas Crown. Winning showdowns with a straight or better wins an extra 40% of the pot in health. So this is one of those pieces of equipment that gives you extra chips. It's one of those pieces of equipment that scales as you get deeper into the game. As the pots get bigger, that extra 40% gets bigger. It's going to be A tier for me. The only hard thing about Midas Crown is that you need to win with a straight or better. So a straight, a flush, a full house, 4 of a kind. This does not go off if you have a pair, 2 pair, or trips. But when it goes off for a lot. And if you're using a character like a wizard that can rerun the river, or a necromancer that can rerun the board, or a druid that can change the turn and the river, you greatly increase your chances of making a hand that's bigger than a straight or bigger. And so you greatly increase the opportunities for Midas Crown to go off. So Really, really useful piece of equipment, really useful in the late game. The pots get bigger, that 40% can be massive, and it can be something that changes you from winning a pot that gets you even to your opponent to winning that same pot and then having them out chipped and being the chip leader. I'm a big fan of Midas Crown and tend to equip it on most of my more aggressive based heroes, warriors, druids. I guess I could throw it on the Necro, but I have other things I prefer to throw on the Necro, which I will be talking about. One of which is Necronomicon. It's got Necro right in the name. Plus 40% starting health to all your minions. I'm throwing this in the C tier despite the fact that I said I use it. I use it for my minion-based builds. Being able to increase their health by 40% is extremely significant, extremely nice, but it's only good for minion-based builds. If I'm doing a pure power character, if I'm doing a pure abilities character, I'm not going to be using the Necronomicon because it's only for buffing your minions. It's best used, in my experience, when having a lot of weaker minions, be it liches or angels or gorgons or demons if you have a crazy amount of minion points. I don't find it to be as useful when I'm just doing a single minion based build like a diamond dragon or a red dragon or an emerald dragon or the rare 2 emerald or 2 diamond or 2 red dragons if I have a ton of points, probably incorporating stables. But yes, when going multiple minions, being able to boost their health by 40%, extremely beneficial. Pretty much a must-have when doing a minion-based build. All right, next we have Phoenix Ashes. When ending a hand with 0 health, heal for 60% of an average health pool, however you lose all your equipment. This is S tier for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, it can't trigger early like Healing Potion can. It only triggers when you have no health as opposed to when you have very low health. Second reason, it's S tier. 60% of average health pool is massive. This is a bigger heal than a lot of the abilities people use to heal. And the thing about Healing Potion is it usually heals for less than your healing ability would. Phoenix Ashes sometimes matches it and is sometimes more. So that's pretty huge. The downside to Phoenix Ashes is that you lose all your equipment. But if you had equipment that was, maybe for a minion-based build, so just stuff that buffs your minions, like the Necronomicon, for example, you don't care if you lose that equipment. Or if all your minions are dead, you don't care if you lose Fishing Pole. So if you're using equipment, or if you have equipment that, say, can't be used heads up, like Buckler, because you're never under the gun, so you never get to straddle, or any of these other pieces of equipment that don't activate when heads up, because a lot of them deactivate when heads up, you don't mind losing that equipment. So Phoenix Ashes is a really, really, really nice healing spell to be able to use in the end game. You literally are the Phoenix rising from the ashes, ready to do battle again. And for all my minion-based builds, I choose Phoenix Ashes over Healing Potion. But for my builds that are really about, hexing and stacking the hex, or being able to regain abilities, in those cases, I prefer to use Healing Potion over Phoenix Ashes because I don't want to lose my ability to regain abilities or to apply a debuff with a lot of damage. Or if I'm using equipment that's giving me lots of free chips from healing, like the Jeweler's Loop, in that case, I'd probably go with a potion over Phoenix Ashes. So it is a little bit of a give and take. It is a decision that you personally have to make, and you need to look at your other equipment to determine if Phoenix Ashes is a better fit than Healing Potion. But both S tier, and in the cases you can use Phoenix Ashes, oh man, it's a winner. It's a winner. Okay, next we have Plate Mail Breastplate, plus 30% starting health, plus 5% for each additional plate mail. So this is basically just giving you extra health at the start of the game, and I'm gonna throw that in C tier. There are other pieces of equipment that give you health plus other benefits as well. Health, it's easy enough to come by in the game. There are plenty of ways to get health. Like so many of these other pieces of equipment help us gain health in other ways, that just increasing the starting stack by 30%, I don't see a huge amount of value. If you have some spells, for example, on like a minion-based build where you're gonna heal your minions for 40% of your health pool, then having an extra 30% makes sense. You can see how they kind of work together and stack together, and why you want to think about, okay, how does this piece of equipment fit into my entire build of my hero, as opposed to just like, yeah, plate mail breastplate, it's freaking C tier, why would I ever use that? You kind of look at how things work together. I still am not using plate mail breastplate, but I'm talking about maybe how you could use it, maybe in conjunction with other things, which actually the next 3 things are going to be. So next we have plate mail gauntlets plus 25% starting health. That's going to be D tier because again, it's just giving you starting health, but we see why plate mail breastplate can be a little better. It's 30% instead of 25% plus an extra 5 for each additional plate mail. So it basically turns the other pieces of plate mail into plus 30%. You have 1, 30%. You have 2, 60%. You have 3, plate mail helm plus 25% starting health. You have 90%. But if you just have these 2 without the breastplate, you're only getting 25% of each for each. So that's why the breastplate is better than the other piece of plate mail. And our final piece of plate mail, the plate mail leggings, also is plus 25% starting health. But if used in conjunction with the breastplate, it would be basically effectively plus 30. So if we have all 4 of these, then the plate mail breastplate would be 30 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, 45%. Each of these is 25, 75%. So we could have 120% extra starting health. Not bad if you have some other abilities that benefit from you having a high health pool early in the game. There are some abilities that let you maybe destroy a minion, but it's only if that minion has less than your health or maybe less than 50% of your health. So by stacking your health early on in the game, you can enhance the power of the early game abilities to help you do well and win in the early game. I'm not using them, but I'm saying that's the situations where maybe you would use them, and also why you can probably pick these up on the marketplace for cheap. All right, next we have prayer beads. Heal 8% of average health pool if there's at least 2 hearts on the flop. This is similar to Jeweler's Loop, but it's healing on hearts instead of diamonds. I believe you get the heal as soon as the flop is dealt, so it doesn't give you the all-in protection that Ankh Necklace does, but it enables you to gain chips even when you aren't playing the hand. You can fold, and when the flop comes 2 hearts, you will get the 8%. So if you combine the prayer beads with Jeweler's Loop, anytime the flop has 2 red cards, you're getting some heal, you're getting some benefit. 8% of the pot on the 2 diamonds for Jeweler's Loop, and 8% of average health pool on hearts with prayer beads. Again, when I'm running my cleric that's focused on survival in the zombie horde, I have both of these equipped so that I'm just getting extra health, extra health, extra health, extra health. It's not all the time, but it's a pretty high frequency and it adds up to a lot of chips over the course of the game. Whereas when I'm using my wizard that I've designed for the horde, I prefer going with the strategy of free blinds from the kite shield and the tower shield, which we'll get to later. I don't use the buckler in that build. The buckler is more for characters I'm ready to do battle with, like my warrior and like my ranger. All right, next we have Quicksilver Mirror. 25% chance any debuff applied to you from an ability controlled by another player is also applied to that ability's controller instead. So this one I'm going to throw in B tier. And we're going to open up B tier to another row. And this is a defensive measure. It's one of the few things that can protect you against debuffs. The downside to it is it's only a 25% chance that it actually goes off. And I don't find it deters players that much from using the debuff spells that they have. It's nice when it hits, it's nice when it protects you, and it's nice when the caster gets a spell that backfires on them. But I don't find the 25% to be that much. And the things that really ramp up the debuffs, like Flayed Skin, don't even activate on the first cast. So it's okay. All right, next we have Raven's Eye Amulet, one of the information-based piece of equipment. 35% chance the turn card is revealed to you after the flop. This is going to go with the other information-based piece of equipment in the B tier category. Once you've already seen the flop, seeing the turn early is helpful, but you're already in the pot, you're already playing heads up. It's not as beneficial as getting that extra information pre-flop with Eye of Foresight, where it can help you determine whether a hand that's not worth playing is worth playing. This will help you know if you're gonna, spike 2 pair, or make your made hand when you're drawing to a straight or a flush. So it can help you play a little more loosely on the flop, but not as much as the Eye of Foresight, and that's why there's the big gap in ranking here, with Eye of Foresight being S tier and Raven's Eye Amulet being B tier. All right, next we have Ring of Regeneration. Gain 5% of average health pools when you possess the button deactivated when heads up. 6% chance to remove all debuffs. So Ring of Regeneration is going to go in the B tier. It's a really nice healing piece of equipment, similar to Prayer Beads, similar to Jeweler's Loop, similar to Ankh Necklace, except it goes off 100% of the time you have the button. I was speaking earlier to the fact that there are button-based builds where you center your equipment around things that have their effect trigger when you're on the button. One of them is Ring of Regeneration, one of them is Longbow, one of them is Spellbook, and there's another cool one that goes with that kind of build called Sticky Gloves. So if you're listening and being like, oh, what are the button-based builds? That's a piece of equipment that goes in there. And if you have Might Makes Right, keep the button 3 hands. If you have this thing stuck, keep the button for 6 hands. Well, you're going to get 6 hands of healing. 5% average health pool. It's 30% of the average health pool. It's going to add up. And it's another one of those things that scales as you get deeper and deeper in the game. I really, really, really love having this on my button-based builds. All right, next we have Round of Drinks. 15% chance to win 15% of any pot won by the player to your immediate left and right disabled when heads up. This one is an S tier piece of equipment. It used to be 25% chance to win 15% of any pot won by the player to your immediate left or right. Even though they reduced it to 15%, this thing is still S tier in my books. It's another one of those pieces of equipment that allows you to get chips for free without having to play the pot. And it scales as the game goes on, because as the game goes on, the pots people play get bigger, and stealing 15% of an end game pot is worth way more than stealing 15% of an early game pot. Now, the one downside to Round of Drinks is if a player across the table wins the pot, you can't use Round of Drinks. But once you're playing three-handed, both players are on your immediate left and right, so it can trigger pretty much every hand that someone wins a pot that isn't you. And this can just get you a ton of chips. The amount of chips I've gotten from Round of Drinks that's just carried me late game has been absolutely insane. Also, I believe the chips are added at the end of the hand. So Round of Drinks can also work as a survival mechanism, the same way Pickpocket can, the way that Jeweler's Loop and Prayer Beads do not. So S tier piece of equipment, if you can find it in the store, pick it up, because you can put it on almost any character and it's going to be a good thing to have. Next, we have Short Bow. 35% chance when you have the button to deal 10% of your health pool and damage to the player with the highest health. So this is kind of like Longbow, but just a little bit weaker. It's one of the newer pieces of equipment that was added to the game. It's going to be D tier easy. It does go off more than Longbow at 35% instead of 20%, but it only deals 10% to one player as opposed to the entire table. And it also deals it to the player with the highest health, who is not going to be eliminated by getting hit for 10% of your health pool. I'm kind of curious what happens if you were the player with the highest health, if it would go to the next most or if it just wouldn't go. Either way, it's D tier. I don't use it, and that's why I don't know the answer to that question. All right, Silken Gloves. 20% starting health and -1 durations to any debuffs on you. This one's going to be D tier. The health bonus is, you know, it's fine. It's nice to get 20%. And the -1 duration debuffs, it's helpful, but it doesn't really make a big difference. If we want to reduce the length of debuffs, we want it to be longer. And as we go through the different silken items here, you'll see why Silken Gloves is at the bottom and another one is at the top. Because these ones aren't so much about the health bonus, they're much more about decreasing the length of the debuff. That's the more important perk to this piece of equipment. So next we have Silken Hat, plus 10% starting health, less, -3 duration to any debuffs on you. This one is going to go to B tier. The length of the debuff is reduced by 3 as opposed to 1. That's actually significant. Reducing a debuff from 6 hands to 3 hands, it's 50%. Reduce a debuff from six hands to 5 hands, who cares, right? So when we're using silken equipment, it's to decrease the lengths of debuffs primarily. The health boost is just a little bonus on top, a little icing on the cake. And so that's why Silken Hat with -3 duration debuffs is B tier, and Silken Gloves is D tier. Silken Pants, 15% starting health and -2 duration any debuffs on you. You can guess where it's going to go, in between the two in the C tier. Reasons are exactly the same as previously mentioned. No need to really talk any more about it. And then we have Silken Robe, plus 5% starting health and -4 duration to debuffs on you. That one is going to go into the A tier. Most debuffs at their base are for 6 hands. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, but most of them are 6. Reducing from 6 hands to 2, extremely significant. If someone hits you with a debuff that lasts 3 hands, take off 4, doesn't even exist. So like if someone hits you with the Cursed Pentagram for 3 hands and you have Silken Robe, negates it. Total protection. Now, there are pieces of equipment that will lengthen a debuff, which we'll get to later. They're going to be the studded pieces of equipment. And they're the same, it can be +1, +2, +3, +4 in duration. So having the Silken Robe both shortens the length of regular debuffs, can totally eliminate debuffs altogether if it's a short cast. And if someone has a studded piece of equipment that adds +4 in duration, this neutralizes it. So Silken can kind of neutralize studded. And, the 5% starting health, it's whatever. But -4 to debuffs, very helpful, especially if you're in a game where people are casting poison and hex and bleeding and heavy bleeding and all the things that you don't want anything to do with. I'm pretty sure, it'll also help with the silence too. If people make it you can't cast abilities, this will lower the duration for that. Good stuff. Next we have, speaking of good stuff, we have Sleep Potion. One-time use when ending a hand under 30% of the average health pool. Shelter and gain healing buff for 5 hands. 3 at the final table. Cannot be used, heads up. For this video, I'm going to put it A tier. But if it was totally my call and I didn't factor in the information from the developers of the game at all, I would put Eye of Foresight in the A tier and I would put Sleeping Potion in the S tier. And you know what? It is my video, so that's what I'm going to do. Based on the numbers, based on the data, they say Eye of Foresight's A tier. I think Crystal Ball is the only true. Or they say it's S tier. I say it's A tier. Sleeping Potion is the real S tier ability. It gives you shelter. It gives you shelter, which means you don't have to post the blinds, which means you don't have to post the antes, which means you don't have to post anything. Plus you heal for 5% of the average health pool. 5 hands, that's 25% health gain. And that's if you're average health. If you're short stack, you're getting way bigger percentage added to your health. If you're a big stack, you're not going to activate Sleeping Potion. So this thing generally gives you more than 25% of your health back, sometimes 50. If you're really short and it's really deep in the game, this Sleeping Potion can like double or triple you up while you're not posting blinds. The one thing to note about it is it will trigger if you have under 30% of the average health pool. It will trigger that automatically. So the same way you had to watch with Potion, your starting stack, this one you have to pay even more close attention to, because as soon as you're 30% of average, it's going to go off. You can hover over your health bar or the health like orb or whatever, and it'll show you what the biggest stack, shortest stack, and average stack are. So you just need to keep an eye on the average health pool so that this doesn't go off accidentally. The other reason that they said it should be A tier instead of S tier is because Sleeping Potion can't save you from elimination. If you get stacked and you have no health left, Sleeping Potion cannot save you. It will not go off. But when combined with Potion or Smoke Bomb, which give you some health, or any of, Ankh Necklace, which give you some health, then Sleeping Potion can go off. So it's like an enhanced booster to your extra life pieces of equipment and your extra life abilities, in that it gives you shelter. It's a very defensive maneuver. It's not something that's going to help you win tournaments, but it's something that's going to help you get into the money, and something that's going to help you get deeper in the money if you're on the final table and people are battling it out because the blinds are big. So for the zombie horde, Sleeping Potion, incredible. For Flip for Your Life, Sleeping Potion, incredible. In fact, for most tournaments, Sleeping Potion is extremely good. And I don't care what the devs say, it's my video. I have Foresight's going down at A tier. Sleeping Potion, going where it belongs, at the top. Another one that's going to go at the top, Smoke Bomb. One-time use, ending a hand with 0 health. Instead of being eliminated, pickpocket 5 to 20% of the pot. Healing equipment, survival equipment, always going to be S tier. Extra lives, absolutely essential. I personally use Potion or Phoenix Ashes. I see some other people use Smoke Bomb. I think the logic was Healing Potion can go off accidentally, whereas Smoke Bomb only goes when you have 0 health left. So it's always going to be like kind of your last ditch effort. I've just seen that most of the time when you take 5 to 20% of the pot, it is a lesser amount of health than 25% of the average health pool. So I think the only time I'd really see this being better than Healing Potion is if you're like chip leader versus second place playing a massive pot where 5 to 20% of that pot's going to be really big. But because Heroes of Hold'em is so much about survival and moving up the payout structure, I don't see why you would get into that confrontation in the first place. So personally, I don't use Smoke Bomb. I either use Healing Potion or Phoenix Ashes. But because of the ability that it has, the effect that it has, and because of the fact that I see a ton of really good players using it, I agree that it's still an S tier piece of equipment. You cannot have Healing Potion and Smoke Bomb both equipped. You have to pick one or the other. Otherwise, I would use both. But that's why, you know, I have an S tier piece of equipment that I don't actually personally use. One S tier piece of equipment, though, that I definitely use, that almost everybody uses in the game because it might just be the very best piece of equipment in the entire game, is Spellbook. When you possess the button, 3% chance to reactivate a random ability that you have used during this event. Bolstered. So at a full table, this is 15% of the time activating on the button. Five-handed, it's 12. Four-handed, it's 9. Three-handed, it's 6%. Heads up, it's 3%. It may not sound like a super high frequency, right? Even at the highest amount, 15%, 1 out of 7 or so. But getting an ability back is absolutely insane. It's the most valuable thing you can do in Heroes of Hold'em. And one strategy you can do is you pick an ability to cast that you want to get back. You cast it early and you don't use any of your other abilities until Spellbook hits and you get that one back. It's not guaranteed to go, but you know, 15% chance if you see the button 6 times, it's probably going to go off. Even if you see it 3 times, you got about a 50-50 shot. And if you're playing something like the Thief, where you can cast this thing stuck and keep the button for 6 hands, odds are you're probably going to get this thing stuck back. And you can cast it again. And you'll probably get it back and you can cast it again. And that's where, you know, Spellbook's great for all heroes. But if you have a hero that holds on to the button at a higher frequency than others, like Might Makes Right or an upcoming piece of equipment, we have Sticky Gloves, it's just going to make Spellbook hit that much more often and make Spellbook that much more powerful. So Spellbook is something you'll want to have if you're doing a button-based equipment build, but you pretty much want it regardless, because unless your hero is designed in a way where you only need to use each of your abilities once and you have the best abilities and you have a series that you go through, you're probably going to want to be able to get one of them back. It's never bad to get an ability back. There are some builds that don't need it, but most heroes will benefit from being able to get an ability back. And I've talked to a lot of people and it's pretty much a consensus that Spellbook, despite only being a rare piece of equipment, is probably the best piece of equipment in the entire game. All right, next we have Spiked Collar. 10% of total pots you win are distributed to your minions. This one's just going to go D tier. I guess you would use this in a minion-based build. But even so, when I'm doing a minion-based build, yes, I'm trying to do things that are going to give my minions more chips and more health, but rarely at the expense of taking the chips from me. I would rather have the chips than give them to my minions because I think I'm going to play better poker than they are. Actually, I know I'm going to play better poker than they are. They're minions. They're terrible at this game. But they can still get you leech and be beneficial. They serve a purpose, but their purpose usually involves them getting stacked or punching their chips at some point. So using a piece of equipment that's going to cost me chips to give it to them and basically decrease the utility of my chips, not something I want to do. Even on a minion-based build, this is still going to be D tier in my books. All right, next we have Spyglass. 13% chance to reveal a whole card of all of your opponents during pre-flop, only visible to you. So it's going to go off and your opponents aren't going to know it's gone off. But the problem is you only see one whole card. You only have half the story. This is going to be C tier in my books. It goes off twice as often as Crystal Ball, but you get half the information. And half the story, it's just not it. It's just not it. It's nice to know one of your opponent's whole cards. It can sometimes trick you into making wrong decisions. That's the other reason I put Eye of Foresight in A instead of S. I have made bad plays with Eye of Foresight. I'm like, oh, I know I'm going to hit a pair, and it wasn't even top pair. So anyway, I find that Spyglass can get you into trouble. It is beneficial to have that information, but it's nowhere near as useful as knowing both of your opponent's whole cards. So even though it hits at a higher frequency, I don't think that the twice as often activation is worth the half of the information that you gain, because knowing 2 cards is worth way more than double of knowing one of the cards. And so, you know, even if Spyglass was going off at 17% of the time, I still think I'd take Crystal Ball. If Spyglass was hitting 21% of the time, triple, now I think it's getting close. But I mean, Crystal Ball is where it's at. So the only time I would use Spyglass is if I'm doing a build that is all information gathering. So I'm going to have Crystal Ball, I'm going to have Spyglass, I'm going to have marked cards, I'm going to have Eye of Foresight, I'm going to have Raven's Eye, and I'm going to have Torch. So I get to see all the cards some of the time. One other card some of the time. One of the first card of the flop 30% of the time. 60% of the time I'm going to see when I have a pair. And you just have a hero that is purely based on information. If you're just a poker player and you're going to benefit from having more info about your opponents, maybe you want to try a purely information-based build. And in that case, I would throw Spyglass in the mix. All right, next we have Stables, +3 added to your minion points. This is a minion-based build piece of equipment. I'm going to throw it in B tier. It's like Gorgon Leash, but a little bit better. Gorgon Leash gets you a 3-point minion, which is a Gorgon. Stables gives you an extra 3 minion points, which you could use to get a Gorgon, or you could use to get an Angel, or if you're at 5 minion points, you could use this to get a Diamond Dragon worth 8. Or if you happen to be at 9 minion points, you could use this to get to 12 and you could go double dragon, 2 red dragons. So despite the fact that it is a minion based build ability, kind of only, I'm still throwing it in B tier because the flexibility that it gives you by giving you the 3 minion points to do whatever you want with is worth way more than getting this specific type of minion. There's a lot more utility and flexibility in Stables. And when I'm doing a minion based build, I absolutely love having Stables because it just gives me so many different options that I can work with. All right, next we have Staff of Domination. Plus 10% leech and plus 25% starting health to all minions you control. This is also another minion-based build piece of equipment. I'm throwing it in B tier. I used to think Necronomicon was better because you get 40% health boost, and the Staff of Domination, you only get 25%. But the extra 10% leech that comes with it, it's crazy. You can take an Angel from 30 to 40% leech. You can take a succubus from 10% to 20%, effectively doubling the leech. And because minions are going to play poorly and give away their chips, you want to have the leech as high as possible, because the higher the leech is, the more of the pots they do end up winning, you're getting a share of. If you're having that great setup where you're playing in a 2-person tournament and your minions have an entire table to themselves, well, every pot that one of them wins, wouldn't you rather half of that goes to you rather than a third, or rather than 10% of it? Because that means the chips are getting funneled to you and siphoned to you more quickly, and you'll be able to use them more effectively than the minions will. So Staff of Domination is also really nice because if you're playing something like a Necro where you already have whatever it is, plus 15% leech, now it's plus 25% leech. And now your Angels that started with 30% are giving you 55% of their leech. 55% of the pots won. So it really adds up quickly. And I'm happy to sacrifice a little bit of a health bonus to get that 10% leech bonus. I think that, same as the comparison I was doing, right? We give up 15% health to get 10% leech. I would happily give up 20, maybe 25% health to get 10% leech. So if Necronomicon was plus 50% health, interesting. Plus 60% health, now I'm thinking they're probably in the same realm of quality. But at this point, 15% less health for Staff of Domination, but 10% leech, clearly a better piece of equipment, and that's why it's going B tier, while Necronomicon goes in C tier. Granted, if I'm doing a minion-based build, all 3 of these pieces of equipment are probably going to be in the mix. Stables, Necronomicon, and Staff of Domination, because if I can have plus 65% starting health, and 10% leech, and an extra minion, sign me up. All right. Next, we have the coup de grace, the essential piece of equipment for a button-based equipment build, sticky gloves. 6% chance when you are on the button, you keep it again next hand, bolstered. So at a full table, 30% of the time you have the button, you will keep it again for the following hand. At a 5-handed table, 24% of the time you have the button, you will keep it again for the following hand. On a 4-handed table, 18% chance. These are pretty good numbers. This is a pretty high frequency. It's not 50%, but it's, the next best thing. This is an A tier piece of equipment, not solely on the fact that, you can keep the button for an extra hand and the small blind and the big blind have to pay it again. And, in late stages, that is very useful. If you're at the end game, stacks are shallow, keeping the button and not having to pay the big blind, or getting one hand later before you'll have to pay the big blind, very beneficial. This is kind of like the shields that give you free chips, because you just delay how quickly the blinds hit you. Plus, if the small blind or big blind are kind of short, kind of up against the ropes, them having to pay those blinds again is going to be detrimental to them. But the reason that sticky gloves is an A tier piece of equipment is because of how it combines with the other pieces of equipment that only activate on the button. Spellbook, best piece of equipment in the game, activates 15% of the time you're on the button. Well, if you keep the button an extra 30% of the time, now you're looking at more like, it's kind of like 22% of the time, or it's 2 shots at 15%. Your longbow now has an extra 30% chance to go off again. And so if you're doing, your ring of regeneration is going off a second time, 30% of the time, right? So instead of getting 6% health, it's like you're getting 8% health. So sticky gloves combines really nicely with these other button-based pieces of equipment. And there are some button-based abilities in the game as well. And it can really just turn you into a nightmare to play against if you have all these abilities that stack when you're on the button. And so sticky gloves kind of opens up a realm of possibilities. Granted, it's only a 30% boost. It's a 30% boost to that frequency. And it can really allow you to have a lot more fun. So A tier piece of equipment, but specifically when used in conjunction with those other pieces of equipment that trigger some percentage of the time or all the time when you're on the button. Okay, next we get into the debuff enhancers. These are the ones that lengthen the effect of a debuff on other people. These are kind of the opposite of the silks. These are the studded pieces of equipment. So first we have studded leather cap, plus 10% starting health, plus 3 duration to all debuffs you inflict. This is going to be C tier. Plus 3 duration is pretty good. The 10% health bonus is just a little bit of extra something, nothing special. But well, I'll just go through the other ones and you'll see why this is C tier and the other ones are differently ranked. Next we have studded leather chest, which I think should be chest plate, but whatever. Plus 20% starting health, plus 1 duration for each additional studded. So this one I'm going to throw into B tier. Originally I had these reversed because I'm like, it's all about the extra length of the duration. But studded leather chest can be combined with others to get more. So initially it's a +1, but as soon as you have a second piece, it's a +2. If you happen to have a third piece, it's a +3. So it can quickly scale to give you as much of an extra debuff duration enhancement as the studded leather cap can. Plus it gives you double the health bonus. 20%, it's really not bad. It's only 10% less than the breastplate. And I don't know, 20%, it's pretty good. So 20% plus an extra duration of debuff, plus opening the door to other debuffs, I put it in B tier. Granted, if I was only going to use one studded piece of armor, I would not use this because I would want one with a longer duration. And that one piece would be studded leather gauntlets, plus 5% starting health and plus 4 duration to all debuffs you inflict. I'm throwing this in the A tier. It is basically the yang to the yin of the silken robe. Both of them do +4, right? One increases the length of the debuffs by 4. The other one decreases the length of the debuffs by 4, and they both add 5% to your health. If you're doing a debuff based character where you're casting poison, you're casting hex, you're casting bleeding, you're casting burning, being able to lengthen those debuffs, very powerful. This stacks very well with Cursed Pentagram, as well as other pieces of equipment that activate debuffs on opponents. Next, we have the final of the studdeds, studded leather leggings, plus 15% starting health and plus 2 duration to any debuffs you inflict. This one's gonna go in the D tier because it's only a +2, and studded leather chest plate is already +2 once you have a second piece of equipment. So, we have the +2 at the bottom, the +3 in the middle, the +4 at the top, and the +1 that can become a 2, 3, a 4 with the extra health bonus in the B tier. Okay, next we have Tent. When you possess the button, minions you control gain 12% of average health pool at the start of their next hand, deactivated when heads up. Since this is a minion based ability, I gotta throw it in the D tier. I gotta throw it in the D tier. I don't want to, but I got to. Tent is superior to fishing pole in my opinion. If you're playing 5-handed, they are equal. Fishing pole hits 20% of the time. You have the button 20% of the time. If you're playing 6-handed, fishing pole may seem like it's a little better because it's hitting 20% of the time, and tent is only hitting 16% of the time. Playing 4-handed, tent's hitting 25% of the time. If you're playing 3-handed, tent's hitting 33% of the time. So because in the games where you're playing a minion-based build and you're probably focusing on small field tournaments, you know, 2-man sit and goes, maybe the 4-man sit and goes, where your minions represent a large percentage of the field. Often when you get to the final 2 tables, you will find that you still have 2, 3, maybe even 4 minions in play. Now, if you're on the 3-handed table and every 3 hands, your minions are gaining 10% of average health pool, which is much higher than it was at the start of the game because only 7 players remain. That is an insane amount of health that they're going to generate. And you can just play hands as fast as possible and just heal them up for 10 each, heal them up for 10 each, heal them up for 10 each. Actually, it's 12%. It used to be 10, they boosted it to 12. You can really scale the health of your minions with this. Also, if you make the final table with multiple minions, as soon as you're playing 5-handed with 3 minions, 4-handed with 2 minions, 3-handed with 1 minion, the amount of health that the tent generates is insane. And then if you have other buffs working for you, or you have high leech working for you, you basically use tent to give your minions health, and then you win the pots off them, or they win pots off the other player, or chop pots, whatever, and you leech that health back. It just prints chips out of thin air. It's a specific situation that you need to get to, where you're at the final table, 3-handed with a minion, or 4-handed with 2 of your minions, or on the final table bubble, where you're playing on the 3-handed table and you have, you know, 2 or 3 minions left. But when you get in that situation, it's amazing. And I find that if I'm playing against someone 3-handed where they have a minion and they have tent, or if they happen to have tent and fishing pole, it's really tough to catch up. And one of the only ways that that situation can work out is if you have like charm or something, you can steal the minion from them. So tent, I think, is slightly better than fishing pole. They're even more powerful when used in conjunction. Obviously, if you were doing a minion-based build, these are not D-tier abilities, but because this video is primarily speaking to the general situations, the one you'll find yourselves in more often, and when you're playing against tougher competition, you're less likely to do a minion-based build, and that's why these are at the bottom. But if you're doing a minion-based build, I mean, it's kind of tent, fishing pole, Necronomicon, Staff of Domination, stables, and then kind of whatever else you like to round it out, whether it's a Phoenix Ashes or a healing potion or a spell book. That's often going to be the combination. Actually, like if I have 6 pieces of equipment and I'm doing a minion-based build, I'm probably doing Phoenix Ashes, stables, Staff of Domination, Necronomicon, fishing pole, and tent. If I have an extra piece of equipment, maybe a Gorgon leash, because now I'm getting maximum minions with maximum health bonus, plus I'm healing them throughout the event. And if I get stacked and need to heal, I'm going to use Phoenix Ashes because it gives me a much bigger heal. And at that point, my minions are probably all dead. So I have no downside to losing all this equipment that doesn't serve me anymore. So that's kind of how I do a minion-based build. And depending on the specific hero, I might sub out the fishing pole or sub out the Gorgon leash or sub out 2 of them and maybe add a spell book or a sleeping potion. But that's generally the main things I'm focusing on when doing a minion-based build. The same as when I'm focused on doing a button-based build, I'm focusing on sticky gloves, spell book, longbow, ring of regeneration, right? Okay, we're almost there at the end. Next we have torch. 40% chance to have the river revealed to you on the turn. This is another information-based piece of equipment. It's going to go alongside the other information-based pieces of equipment in the B tier. Then we have Tower Shield, bolstered, 8% chance for a free big blind. So if we're playing on a full table, this is going to hit 40% of the time. Playing 5-handed, it's going to be 32%, 400, 24%, 16%, 8% heads up. I think it's still active, heads up. And this is going to be A tier. 40% chance to get a free big blind is very high. It's very high, right? And if you're combining this with a 40% chance to get a free big blind and a 55% chance to get a free small blind, one of the blinds is probably going to be free every round. Sometimes both of them are going to hit and both of the blinds are going to be free. And because the blinds get bigger as the game goes on, the ability or the opportunity to not have to pay those blinds becomes more and more valuable. So as I said earlier, when I'm doing a build for the zombie horde, where I'm really focused on survival and the blinds get insanely big. We're talking millions, and I can't afford those blinds. No one can. Having pieces of equipment that enable you to not have to pay the blinds some percentage of the time is extremely valuable. So I'll typically see in the zombie horde people either use the double shield combination of the tower shield and the kite shield. If they want to do, I don't have to pay blinds. Or if they're looking to get the free chips back as often as possible, we're seeing round of drinks, ankh necklace, jeweler's loop, and prayer beads. I don't see any reason why if someone had 7 equipment slots, they couldn't try combining both of those together. Round of drinks, ankh necklace, prayer beads, jeweler's loop, tower shield, kite shield, and then a potion for the 7th. Now, I wouldn't use Phoenix Ashes with this build because losing these pieces of equipment would be really detrimental. These are pieces of equipment that allow you to survive and stay in the game. You don't want to get away your free pass to get free chips just to get double the benefit. So I would definitely go healing potion if I'm going that kind of survival build for the zombie horde. I would not go Phoenix Ashes. And in a small field game with tough opponents, I mean, it could still work. It could still carry you. Free chips are always really good. I just feel like it's more fun to have the other piece of equipment that can, you know, do more damage, gain abilities back, things like that. But for a basic build, probably would work. All right, next we have Vial of Poison, +4 duration to any debuffs you inflict. This is basically the same as the studded leather gauntlets, except it doesn't have the 5% health boost. So this is going to be B tier. If you're doing a debuff based character, like, you know, a Necro, Hex Necro, or a Fire Wizard, or I guess there'd be like Poison Ranger or Poison Thief, then having both of these equipped is pretty nice because you're adding +8 to the length of the debuff, where even if someone has Silken Robe, it's countering one of them, it's not countering the other. So you can really increase the length of the debuffs if you have both studded gloves and Vial of Poison. And I would, you know, put these two together before I would put these two together, because this gives me +6 duration, whereas this gives me +8. Granted, often you don't experience the full duration of an effect. The player either dies beforehand, or if they have cleansing debuffs, they'll just get rid of it. So in tougher lineups where players are going to have the cleanse debuff spells, these debuff lengtheners are not as beneficial as they are in softer lineups or in games where people don't have the cleanse debuffs equipped. So if I'm playing in a 2-man tournament and I'm using a debuff based character like a Necro, I'm probably going to have both of these on, so I get +8 to the length, and then it's pretty much lights out, GG's. But in a tougher lineup where I expect players are going to have a cleanse debuffs thing, I'm either going to just use one of them to enhance the length of the debuffs, or I'm just not going to play a debuff based character because I know that they're kind of easy to play against if you have a strong character. All right, next we have Wand of Decay. One-time use. When winning a showdown against a minion, destroy that minion and absorb 100% of its health pool. This is kind of a cool piece of equipment. It's kind of a fun one. I'm going to throw it in the B tier because it's situational, right? You first have to get into a pot with a minion. Then you want to keep the pot as small as possible against that minion, because if you activate Wand of Decay and you absorb 100% of that minion's health pool, you want them to have as much health as possible. So you don't want to use this if you're playing an all-in pot with a minion where they have no health left at the end of the hand, or they have a couple hundred chips. You would ideally want to use this in the early stages where you see flops cheaply with minions. Try to, you know, check it down or keep the pot as small as possible, which they'll usually oblige to. Unless they have a super strong hand, they're usually willing to check it down. And then if you win at showdown, hit the Wand of Decay and just eliminate that player and take all their health. This is one of the few pieces of equipment and abilities that can target dragons as well. And because dragons can have, you know, 250, 325, 400% of the average health pool, if you're lucky enough to A, end up on a table with a dragon minion, B, get into a pot with it, C, keep that pot small, D, win that pot at showdown, Wand of Decay, pretty epic. You could 3, 4, 5x your stack. But you see, there are a lot of contingencies that have to happen. There are a lot of criteria that need to be met for Wand of Decay to really come into play. And that's why it's B tier instead of A tier. But the effect of it is so good in terms of the benefit that's why it's B tier and not C or D tier. All right, next we have a War Axe. Damage all players 6% of average health pool if there are at least 2 clubs on the flop. This one's going to be a C tier in my books. So we've seen that the Demonic Gauntlet is the one that hits on spades. It's a B tier. We've seen that Jeweler's Loop is the one that hits on diamonds. That's for healing. It's B tier. We have the Prayer Beads that hits on hearts. It's healing. It's B tier. So why is the War Axe C tier? Well, 6% damage. Early game, it's pretty irrelevant. It's not going to do a whole lot. Yeah, that's mainly it. The thing that's cool about War Axe is as the field gets smaller, fewer players remain, average health pool gets bigger. The amount of damage that this does is going to be higher. The other cool thing about War Axe, much like Longbow, is it's one of those pieces of equipment that can cause elimination. If someone has less than 6% of the average health pool, 2 clubs come on the flop, you're going to be able to take them out and eliminate them. Usually that's not going to be the case though. Players are going to have much more than at minimum 6% of the average health pool. So since this doesn't hit the elimination factor as often, that's why I ranked it lower than the other pieces of equipment that are based on 2 cards coming. Hex, you're always gaining 15%. That's great. Here you're doing 30% damage, but you know, it's often not going to be elimination. And it doesn't have that extra benefit of gaining you chips, which the other 3 do. So that's why this one's C tier as opposed to B tier, despite being similar to the other ones. All right, next up, we have War Drums Bolstered. 6% chance when you have the button, no one but you can use abilities this turn. And this one is going to be a B tier piece of equipment as well. War Drums is pretty nice when it goes off, that you can use abilities and other players can't. It can really limit players' abilities to play back at you because they can't rely on their abilities to save them, bail them out of pots, this, that, and the other. But at a full table, it hits 30% of the time. Same as Sticky Gloves. And then it hits less and less frequently as you have fewer players. And I think that keeping the button for an extra hand, especially when you stack it with all those other button benefiting pieces of equipment and abilities, is just way more useful than players not being able to cast spells for 1 turn. They know that this turn they can't cast spells, but they'll be able to cast them the next turn. So it's easy for them to kind of wait it out. This is beneficial in unique situations where you happen to have the button and you really don't want the players in the blinds to be able to cast spells. And it can prevent people from healing. I think the fact that it can prevent people from healing is why it's B tier instead of C tier, because taking away people's heals is one of the most, detrimental things we can do to other players in the game. Take away their extra lives. So yeah, that's why I throw it in B tier, but definitely not good enough to be A tier. Probably too good to be C or D tier. And then finally, our last piece of equipment is Whetstone. Plus 1% effect added to debuffs you inflict. And originally I didn't understand this properly, so I ranked it lower. But when I learned more about specifically the math and the numbers of how this all works, I realized that this is definitely a A tier piece of equipment. Okay, if we look at the primary debuffs in Heroes of Hold'em, keep a close eye on the numbers. So bleeding, 3% health pool damage per hand. Burning, 5% health pool damage per hand. Heavy bleeding is doubled, so from 3 to 6. Hex, 3% damage per hand with leech. Poison, 4% damage per hand. Yeah. So at first, I just totally misunderstood this. I thought it added 1%, so I'm like, okay, 3 goes to 3.03, 4 goes to 4.04. Why is this a legendary piece of equipment? How is that any beneficial whatsoever? Then I talked to the dev and he's like, no, dude, Whetstone's sick. You can take a 3 to a 4%. So remember those numbers. We'll look at them one more time. Whetstone adds 1% to the effect of the debuff that you inflict. So bleeding goes from 3% to 4%. That's a 33% increase. Burning, the one that's least benefited, goes from 5 to 6%, still 20%. Heavy bleeding, I guess it'd be a double. And hexed, you go from 3% to 4%. Poison, you go from 4% to 5%, 20% increase, 25% increase, 33% increase. That's actually really, really, really significant. Then when you potentially combine this with spells that increase the size of an effect, like Plague, which increases it by 50%, now you're going from 4% to 6%, instead of going from 3% to 4.5%. If you combine it with Flayed Skin, which doubles the size of a debuff, as well as doubling the duration, now you're going from 4% to 8%, instead of 3% to 6%. If you double it again, you're going from 4 to 8 to 16, instead of 3 to 6 to 12. And when you then add that to the fact that it's over multiple hands, this is really, really powerful, right? Whetstone's really, really powerful. You know, if it's only going to be on, you know, Demonic Gauntlet where you got Hex for one hand, it goes from 3% to 4%, whatever. But if you're using it on, say, Mass Hex, where you're hexing everyone at the table for 6 hands, you go from 3% to 4% times 5 players times 6 hands, that really adds up. So if you then combine it with something like Vial of Poison, where instead of it being 6 hands, you're doing 10 hands, you've now increased the damage by 33% and increased the length by, you know, an extra 66% or whatever it is. So when I'm building a debuff based build where I'm focusing on, you know, casting a lot of hacks or a lot of poison or a lot of burning, I really want to maximize the effect of that. Whetstone is always going to be in the mix because it increases the amount of the damage by a really significant amount when you look at it from percentage terms. And then you want to increase the length. So first you increase the damage by having Whetstone, and then you increase the length by having your studded equipment or your Vial of Poison. Like on my Necro Hexmaster Hex, where I have the Cursed Pentagram, that's 3 hands of Hex for 3%. While you add Whetstone, it's 3 hands at 4%. You add the Gauntlets, and it's 8 hands at 4%. You add a Vial of Poison, oh look, it's 12 hands at 4%. And that's just from a piece of equipment. If I'm casting Mass Hex, which is 6 hands, that's going to be 14 hands at 4%. Then you add Flayed Skin, double the length, double the damage, maybe cast it again, and you can see how a really well-designed debuff-based hero can do some serious damage. Granted, if you're playing against players who can cleanse the debuffs with one ability, it's not as good. Antidote Potion is also one of the counters to that, but it only hits 50% of the time. So that's something to be conscious of, something to be considerate of. If you're playing in the 1 human, 9 NPCs, the 2 human, 4 NPCs, where a lot of players don't have abilities, they can't cleanse debuffs, at most they have an Antidote Potion, then these builds of strong debuffs with enhanced damage and enhanced length are absolutely going to destroy. They are going to incinerate the competition and allow you to coast to the money over and over and over, and then just get to battle it out for heads up to see if you finish in second or first. So that's it. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. We have gone through all 65, maybe even 66 pieces of equipment in Heroes of Hold'em. We've ranked them from S tier to D tier. I spoke specifically about which pieces of equipment benefit you more in a tougher field environment versus a softer field environment. I spoke specifically about the combinations of pieces of equipment you'll want to use if you're doing a button-based build hero, a minion-based build hero, a debuff-based hero, a healing-based free chips build-based hero, or just general default strong build hero, which would just be focused on the things in the S tier and the A tier category if you have access to them. Obviously, all these pieces of equipment can be acquired from the chests in Heroes of Hold'em, but if you're having bad luck with the chests and you want to get a specific piece of equipment that you cannot seem to draw in the chest, you can always check the marketplace. There will usually be plenty of things for sale. And if you don't find anything there, you can also post in the Heroes of Hold'em Discord, where there is a marketplace section, and players who have extra items or duplicates are always eager to be able to sell those at a fair price and get some gems tokens in the process. One more time here at the end of the video, I will pull up the categories for the different pieces of equipment. Survival, regain abilities, extra health pregame, in-game buffs, gaining extra pot, dealing damage, free chips, free information, debuffs, less debuffs, prevent damage, minion boost, minion heal, debuff remove, limit betting. And you can see ranked from left to right my opinions on the best pieces of equipment to the worst pieces of equipment based on category. So if you were trying to do just a survival based build, well, you'd want the 4 at the top, but you can only equip sleep potion, one of the other ones. So that's the one category where you wouldn't use all of them. But if you're trying to do some other specific base build, you could just get all the pieces of equipment that are in that category and know that at a baseline, you know, you'll have a pretty solid extra buffs or free chips or gaining extra pod or minion boost kind of thing. So this is your cheat sheet. You can use it, and this is your oh so pretty tier ranking list with all the beautiful images as well. And it's been quite a recording here. Excited to see what the editors are going to be able to do with this, chop it down. I thought we could get it under an hour if we're really lucky, but it's probably going to be about an hour and a half when it's all said and done. But, you know, 80 to 90 minutes breaking down every piece of equipment in Heroes of Hold'em is going to be extremely beneficial for people who play the game or for people who are wanting to learn the game and get better results. So that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been Evan Jarvis for Heroes of Hold'em. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that it helps you build better heroes, get more caches, and ultimately get more wins. I would love to hear your opinions on where you think things rank, or if you think there's some sleeper piece of equipment that should be ranked way higher than I did in the video. Let me know in the comments section of this video so that just as much as you probably enjoyed learning from me, I can go ahead and learn from you too, and the community can all learn from each other. We can become better players, have a better understanding of the game, spread it to more people, give people more enjoyment, and ultimately we can have more fun playing together and growing the great game of Heroes of Hold'em. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you being here. And until next time, you know what to do. Take what you learned, go out there, and get stacking. Peace.